In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create fur planes and apply the textures. Alright, so let's go ahead and apply our textures from Substance Painter. So I went ahead and I exported those out. It's the same process that I showed you in the last lesson for exporting out the textures for the main body. And so let's go ahead and create, well, we have our materials here already. And so what I want to do is I'm going to double click on my diffuse. I'm going to go to bitmap and I'm going to go to the textures file folder. And here's base color and color. And let's go ahead and open that. And we're going to assign that. Let's go ahead and show a viewport. So there you can see the texture. Now, it's not going to look exactly the same, even with our normal map and everything, simply because inside of Substance Painter, that's using a PBR environment. We don't have that set up here in 3ds Max, so just be aware of that. Let's see, let's go in and let's add our bump, so our normal map, and we want to do normal bump, and let's make sure we bump this up to 100, and then let's add our normal map that we baked out this way. So here's our normal map, DirectX, open, and it's not going to show up just yet, so we need to right click on shaded, go to materials, realistic materials with maps, and then the normal map should show up there. So there you can see that. All right, and then we don't have a roughness slot for this here inside of 3ds Max. We have specular level, but that's not exactly what we want. We have glossiness, but it's backwards. Okay, glossiness is not roughness, and so I'm going to go ahead and just skip over that for right now. And so now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and add in the eye for that. So we have our eye color. You can see that that is now in there. We'll need to move down the corners of the eye on this dog just to make sure that that fits properly. Okay. We don't have a normal map on that, so that's just fine. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and create a couple of planes just to kind of show you how this works. So normally what I do is I'll just create a single plane like this. You can have a couple of subdivisions if you like. You don't necessarily have to. And then I'll convert it over to Editable Poly, and I'll start to shape it into what I need for this. So let's go ahead and go to vertex mode, and I'm going to grab my move brush, or move tool I should say, and I'll start to shape this out into what we need for this. And so I'm just kind of thinking about kind of the fur that would go right in here. Go ahead and pull this out. You know, what does that shape look like? And then when we're finished shaping out that plane, whoops, we'll go ahead and we'll put it into position here. And so it's going to look really funny without a texture on it, without the opacity. I also like to go to local mode, so whenever I'm moving these around and rotating them, I can put these in a position. Okay. This one's going to be quite large, so what I could do is actually grab all the vertices and scale those in all three directions, because that is quite large. So I'll put this in a position here, and we'll rotate it a little bit more just to kind of get that a little closer to what that should look like. Okay, and so you'll have some interpenetration and things like that. And what you'll do is you'll actually layer multiple planes on top of one another as you go about doing this. And so let's say that you're ready to apply your texture to this. And so what we need to do is we need to UV this object. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to create a material that is going to hold that texture map. And so we're going to double click on the diffuse color, and we're going to go in and we're going to select the fur for that. And then I'm also going to add that to the opacity. So fur opacity there. And then I'm going to assign that and show in viewport. And you can see that that texture shows up there. Okay, it looks pretty good. Except for it's not UV properly. It doesn't match anywhere near the shape of the object that I have here. And so how do I get that? Well, at this point, what you do is go ahead and just unwrap the plane. And we'll go to our UV editor. And you might look at this and you go, okay, well, everything looks good. So how do I get that to orient properly? What we'll do is we'll actually use this map fur instead of a checker pattern like we normally do for our background. We'll use this fur texture. So whenever I turn that background back on, here's what you see. And then what you do is you take the polygons of that UV space, and we can go ahead and just do a simple relax on this for right now, just to kind of get it into that shape that we see there. And then watch what happens. We can actually go ahead and start to orient this around, and I can scale it down. I say, all right, you know what? I want this UV. I want this to kind of come around the edge here. I want to look something kind of like that. And so there you've got a little tuft of fur, okay, and it's just using this UV, okay, using the same texture. And you'll have multiples of those, and you can switch the UVs around. So if at any time I decide that I want to kind of modify the UVs of this, I can go ahead and do so. So if I grab this vertex, I can kind of start to stretch this out a little bit more. And I can modify kind of how that is laying there. Now you want to be careful when you're doing this, okay, of course, because what will happen is you're going to start stretching the UVs over this texture, and you can start to create some pinches in a few areas, and so you want to be very careful with what you're doing. So just kind of watch as you're UVing it, and just pay attention and kind of look at some of those stretches. And you can see here that I've taken that UV and I've basically just modified that to fit my own needs. And so if I start to look through here and I'm like, I see a little bit of stretching happening right in here, but I think I can handle that. Might move this up here a little bit. And if you ever get to a point to where you feel like it's just not working, it just doesn't look quite right, try modifying the actual geometry a little bit. So as you can see, I've spaced this out just like that. But then what I could do is I can actually convert it to an editable poly. It's already unwrapped and it's using the space that I want it to. But watch this. If we go to vertex mode, let me switch back to my box selection. Let me select this vertex right here. And let me move this around. And I can start to stretch that out. You notice how the UV kind of follows along with that. And so now what we're doing is we're modifying the actual geometry of that fur plane and getting the exact shape that I want out of this. And so now I can really come in here and start to get the look that I want. So you can see why we would do this last, handling the fur planes last, because they can be very flexible and can really help us out. So now at this point, I'll just continue to move these points around and create the volume that I need for the fur. And the really cool thing about this is now I can hold shift and I can drag that out to create a duplicate. And then I can move this around and modify it however I want. I can start to layer these on top of one another and create some pretty cool sideburns for this dog. I know it's not perfect right now, but we would have to add more sheets as we go along, and we would have to modify some of the colors along with that as well. I think this was actually intended for the area underneath, and I could actually take that, duplicate it here, and then just rotate it in such a position that I could actually get that. Okay, and so now I can bring this up. Oops, I don't want to move that. And I can just move this into position. And then modify the vertices to just kind of be where I need that to be. And then shift and drag and duplicate. And just continue to do that until we've oriented these in such a way that it looks natural. Now you'll have to start covering up some of the different planes that you have, stacking them on top of one another. You might even have to use different parts of the texture there. So I would have to create a plane that actually uses something a little bit darker. Okay, and as you can see, it's starting to fade in there. We're having a little bit of a clipping issue. That happens whenever you have transparencies on this. You have multiple transparencies, and so don't be alarmed by that. But you can see how this whole process works. And I can duplicate that. Pull this up into this area here. That looks a little bit more. That was kind of the area that I was looking at whenever I was texturing that to begin with, just to create that tuft of fur that shows up behind the shoulders. So the hardest part is just matching up those textures. Okay, and then we can modify these however we want. Modify their shape, make them a little bit smaller. Okay, and you start to get something that looks a little bit more, has a little bit more volume. And don't be alarmed at this. This is going to take quite a while to fill this out. It does take quite a few sheets of fur to actually get this to look a little bit more natural instead of our dog with these these sideburns here. And so just continue to build that up as you go along, and you'll use some of those different textures. You might modify them a little bit, try to add a little bit more of that red color in there, blending those a little bit better. But as you can see, that's how they are used. And so hopefully you get an idea of how this works, how to create fur for your game animals. And so you build out a base, and then you build out your textures, and then modify them in planes like this. So I hope you guys learned a lot in this. Hope you had fun, and I'll see you guys next time.